Preparing the live stream. Preparing the live stream. And there we are. Hey, everyone. Welcome. We are glad that you are here today and joining us. We are going to get started this morning or this afternoon. And there we are. Hey, everyone. Welcome. I didn't turn it off. It's going at the same time. So here we go. And we are live. All right. Welcome. We are glad to have you. This is our inaugural event. We are so glad to be here. We have Letty Stevens joining me, my good friend Letty Stevens, and the big reveal. The author of the book we read this month is with us as well, Axton Betz-Hamilton. So welcome, ladies. We're both glad to have you here. I wanted to start out by introducing myself. I am Dr. Mary Bell Carlson, and this is our very first event. We are Chief Financial Mom. ChiefFinancialMom.com, and a website that allows you to find out all things money related for moms, whether it be about money, relationships, and really the book we're reading tonight is perfectly suited for that because it's integrated and integral of so many different components of how money affects us or our relationships and our families and can be generational to come. So we're very excited to have Axton with us. And I wanted to start off by giving Letty Stevens, I mentioned before, Letty and I have known each other for several years now. And Letty, I really had this idea in mind of a book club where instead of just reading a book in a vacuum by yourself and then thinking this was an awesome book, to be able to read it with a good friend. So thank you for joining me tonight, and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came here tonight.
Hi, I am Letty Stevens. I'm a personal financial manager in the DC area, and I've been in financial counseling and retirement planning for about 15 years. I got into the field to get my husband to retire, and it worked. And before that, I was a high school math teacher for about 5 years. And so about 20 years of just, helping people understand their numbers. And so I'm really grateful to be here. We're going to have fun. There's so many questions that I have. I just finished the book a half an hour ago, and it's a fascinating read. Like, it's been excellent writing. So yeah, happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Letty, for being here. And yes, Letty and I have gone back many a times. I laugh because she's definitely the numbers person out of the two of us. But we just have a great time, and I'm glad we both come from a financial background. But I wanted to kind of tee this up a little bit and let you know that the books we're reading in book club are not always financial books. This one has a direct link to identity theft, but we really want to also read books too that maybe you don't think have a direct link. It's not a Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, or anyone else telling you what to do with your money. That's not the purpose of this book club. It's simply to read really good literature and learn from them and learn how finances make an impact in your life or in your everyday being. And so we are here to discuss that more. And what better way to discuss it than with the author, Axton? We are so glad to have you here today. Do tell the audience, for those that haven't read your book and found out a lot about you, start off and tell us a little bit about yourself. Don't give us the ending yet, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do now and everything that goes with that.
Okay, well, as you know, I'm Axton Betz-Hamilton, and I'm an assistant professor of consumer affairs at South Dakota State University. And my research focuses on financial abuse within families. That includes identity theft perpetrated by family members. It also includes elder financial exploitation perpetrated by family members. That career choice and that research interest was shaped by my personal experiences that are discussed in the book.
That's awesome. And we're so glad to have you. You're quite a prolific researcher. I've been on several of your research audiences too, in terms of when you give in research briefings and things. And I've been so impressed with not just your story, but also how you've taken that and you've developed really quite a niche out of it and helped so many others along the way, and helped other researchers like myself understand and know more about how to help those that come in contact or are victims. To be honest, I know you don't like the word victim, as you state in your book, but how to help others in that situation that have gone through with it. So with that said, Letty, would you like to start us off and tell us some of your thoughts as you read through the book, and maybe even give a quick summary of what your view of the book was and how it came about?
I was engaged. From the beginning, the writing, it just felt like such a good story. The Babysitter's Club, like I really related to you from the beginning, like that those childhood memories, like you really did pique like a connection, and like you had me hooked at the beginning. And so I found it to be a really compelling story. Like there was an emotional roller, the whole process, and the pain and confusion and accusations, you know, the way people kind of shut down and try and blame others. Like it was wild. The small town connection. My husband from a small town, and I totally get that. You were on point about like everything. Your descriptions were phenomenal. I'm even having my daughter like read the flow that you write, because she's in the process of writing now, and she's 11 and she loves to read. And it's so that age when you start out, 11 is such an important part of childhood development, brain development. And I had found that part really fascinating, that the whole like emotional like growth that occurs at 11. And I'd read somewhere that like 11, 12, and 13, and events that occur to you during that time, they make an impact on the rest of your life, whether they are good or bad. So if you find what you love, if you love something, you know, if something, you know, tragic happens, that could also change your path's course. And so it's such a key point, having the identity stolen of your parents at that point. I can see where it led you to do what you do today. So it was really captivating, and I completely enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the math part, because in the book she would talk about, you know, when the stress of identity theft with her parents, she would turn to math. And she had a joke, she mentioned it 3 times. And, you know, homeschooling now, I see where, you know, my kids, if they're emotional, they can't do math. So they have to like click on this logical brain. And sometimes it's an escape. And I really enjoyed that. It was fascinating. The fact that your mom did taxes and all the identity.
Letty, it sounds like your internet is going a little in and out. So let me jump in.
Taxes are
Let me jump in real quick, and let's start, Axton, since we have the advantage of having you here. We'll kind of walk our viewers through your book from the beginning. You have 3 different parts of your book. So maybe we'll start with part 1 and just kind of set the stage of what happened and how you grew up. I'll kind of give my quick thoughts on that part 1 as well. Letty, thank you for starting us off there. You know, in a lot of ways, you grew up pretty ordinary. You know, you grew up in a small town. You had, you know, your parents, you were an only child growing up. And you mentioned several times in the book that you seemed to be rather a bit of an introvert, and you stayed home. But really, you didn't stay home because of your personality. It really turned out that by 11 years old, like Letty was saying, of her daughter, you had been what you thought was a victim of identity theft. And that continued to perpetrate from a very, very early age, of kind of a scared mentality. You would be almost barricaded in your house and have to hide away. I remember several times in the book, you would be hiding somewhere and watching cars go by, wondering if that was the thief coming to get you. I mean, it's very traumatizing, I feel like, of how you grew up. Tell us a little bit more about those growing up years and the early years and early memories you had.
Sure. So the first part of my book covers from age 11 to age 19, which is when I learned my identity was stolen. When I was 11, this was the early 90s, no one really knew what identity theft was. It wasn't the household words that we now know. And so no one knew child identity theft could happen. So that wasn't even on the radar. My parents knew their identities had been stolen because our mail was missing. So we had a big yellow metal mailbox out by the highway that we lived on. And Mom said our mail was coming up missing. So bills wouldn't show up. My dad's farm magazines, Farm World and Mules and More, those type of publications, they didn't come. My letters from friends and my pen pal letters, those didn't come. And Mom said that's because of identity theft, and people were stealing our mail in order to steal hers and Dad's identities.
Now, Axton, let me ask you right there. Did she call it identity theft? Was that
Yes.
a term used?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So that was well known at that point enough to use the term, even though there was no crime against identity theft at that time.
I'll say it was well known enough to Mom as someone who had a bachelor's degree in finance and worked in the financial services industry.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep.
So she came from a finance background, and it was interesting in your book because your mom took care of all the finances. In fact, your dad knew pretty much nothing about bills being paid and didn't handle any of the finances, which is kind of opposite. Many people assume, or sometimes in couples, it's always the man that handles it. In your family, that wasn't the case at all. Tell us more about that.
Right. So my mom, as I mentioned, had a bachelor's degree in finance, and she worked in the financial services industry for most of her career. So she worked in finance for a car dealership back in the late 70s and early 80s, in fact, up until I was born. Then she was a tax preparer for a number of years, and then was an investment representative for a well-known investment firm in the United States. So because she had that background and that knowledge and was helping other people manage their money, Mom just took that role in our family, in part because she had this role of also being the smart one. So it wasn't just that she had a financial background. It was, she went to college, she's the smart one, let her handle it. Whereas my dad didn't attend college, but he worked hard. He had a full-time job as a department store manager for a grocery store. He still has that job. It's been over 50. So he was working hard. He was making the money, and it was Mom's job to manage that money.
Wow. And
it seems what I saw is your father is the stable one, right? Like just level, very stable, and then your mom had highs and lows. One of the interesting parts in the book was the financial planner that she turned in for embezzlement for $300,000. Like she actually reported somebody for $300,000. What happened to that person? Did they go to jail?
So
white collar crime?
Everything in the book about that particular person. And I have to say, we were careful here, we being my editor and I, because I don't trust that person to this day. I don't trust them. I think they know more about things that my mom did than what's been revealed, because it's been a rock I haven't been able to overturn. So if you go to the FINRA broker check website, you can search this person's name and see that they have been barred from having any type of license, Series 7, Series 6, etc. And all the details from the case that were there on that website, that's what we used in the book. Nothing more, nothing less. It didn't embellish it. Out of concern that this guy could see that and try and sue me, that was a concern. Just because I didn't trust him when I was a teenager. I do not trust him to this day. Now, Mom says, or she said, that she turned him in. She told Dad that. I remember her telling Dad that. She told one of her friends that, who told me that when I was working on the book. I don't have any objective evidence that that's true.
Yep. And Axton, you say that because by the end of the book, everything unravels. After your mother passes away, everything unravels and starts to come out. And I'm sure, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but it seems like now you have to question everything that your mom ever said.
Oh, I did.
Do you still do that? Tell us about it.
So when we found out that Mom had been the offender all along, and so this was 2 weeks after she passed away. It's actually 13 days. I have a weird thing about remembering dates, and I think that must be a trauma thing, because Mom passed away. Okay, I'll back up even a little bit more. I got married on February 10th, so Mom could see me get married before she passed away. Mom passed away on February 12th. On February 25th, Dad found a credit card statement in my name for a credit card that was over limit, that had been run over limit in 2001. Now, mind you, this is 2013 when he's finding this credit card statement. And it was in a file folder with my birth certificate. And he called at me to rant and rave at me and yell at me for running a credit card over limit in 2001. When I said I didn't do it, he said, "Yes, you did. I have the credit card statement in my hand." And I said, "What credit card statement is it?" And he told me, and I said, "Well, that was one of the credit cards that was taken out in my name as part of the identity theft. What's Mom doing with that?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but it's in here in a file with your birth certificate." And he kept saying that the logo of Mom's employer was on the credit card statement. And that didn't make sense to me at the time without seeing it, because I thought, well, maybe she faxed it on company letterhead, because she worked for this investment firm at the time. And I said, "Dad, did she fax it on company letterhead? And that's what you're seeing?" He goes, "No, it's right on the statement." Well, when I was able to go home over spring break, so it was about this time 8 years ago, the credit card statement was a partnership arrangement. Well, the credit card was a partnership arrangement between my mother's employer and First USA Bank. So while First USA Bank was being reported on my credit report, the credit card, how you obtained it was you went to an investment representative's office, filled out a credit card application, and they submitted it for you. And then you got a credit card with my mother's employer's logo on it, so the investment firm's logo, but the bank was First USA. So Mom likely went into her office, filled out the credit card application in my name, and submitted it, likely stole my identity and got a commission in the process, for the credit card sign up. And likely what happened is, this credit card was taken out in 2000. I was a freshman in college in 2000. And what likely happened is that First USA ran my credit report and saw that the addresses were different and requested verification that Mom was me. Are you really Axton Betz? And so they wanted additional documentation. So Mom got a copy of my birth certificate. The birth certificate was not my original, because I had my original at that time. The birth certificate was a certified copy issued by the county health department on June 7th of 2000.
Wow.
And they were in a file folder together.
And so
Wow.
your family got their identity stolen at 11, when you were 11. And then there was a credit card opened in your name at 13, and you didn't discover that you too had gotten your identity stolen until you were 19. And what's wild is,
Right.
it's like, parents can open a credit card for the kid, put their name on it. And I've seen parents do this in good faith, so that when the kid is 19, they have a credit score.
I think Letty
700
froze.
and,
There you go.
whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen this with my clients. It's actually quite common, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I do want to catch our readers up a little bit, because I do have some that I did promise them. You don't have to come to this book club having read the book, because I will be totally one that I am guilty of that all the way. So I'm going to catch all of the readers up that may have not read the book. So as you're figuring out, Axton had several experiences, and Axton, there's quite a few more questions we want to ask you about that early time period. But going out throughout life, you pulled your credit report when you were in college, right? For the first time, and got a huge packet back, which was very unusual. Typically, it's a very small package when you don't have any credit. You never had bought anything. You had never received a credit card. You had never bought a car. You never had a house. You never had any reason to use a loan before that time. And you get that packet back. And then what happened from there? What did you, when you got that packet in the mail, what did you think?
Well, I remember getting the packet out of the mail, and our mailboxes at the apartment complex I lived in were these black metal boxes attached to the outer wall. And this big manila envelope is just sticking up out of my mailbox. And I see it's from the credit reporting agency, and it was really thick. And I thought, well, credit reports must be really hard to read. They must come with a lot of instructions and disclosures. And, it was the end of the day. I'd been on campus all day, and I just wanted to be done. I didn't want to deal with something official, but I opened it. I went in the studio apartment I had and sat on my hand-me-down floral print couch from the 60s and opened the envelope, still thinking, there's a lot of directions on how to read a credit report. What I learned very quickly is that credit reports do not come with a lot of instructions or disclosures, but rather mine was 10 pages long, full of fraudulent credit card entries and associated collection agency entries that dated back to the time that my parents' identities had been stolen in 1993. So at that time, it could be reasonably assumed that the persons responsible for their identity theft were also responsible for mine. Now, my credit score also came with the credit report. And, in 19, I didn't know beans about credit scores. And, in big black letters, it said, your credit score is 380. Well, the first 19 years of my life being in school, 100 is perfect. So I thought, well, 380 is almost 4 times as perfect. Until I read the size 2 font that said your credit score is in the second percentile of all credit scores in the nation.
Oh my goodness.
And really the only way to go from there is up. And it was a long, hard climb, because the first creditor I called said, so I explained the situation. This was for a credit card that was taken out when I was 13. And I thought, surely they'll pull it from my credit report because I was 13.
Right.
I mean, just from, the cardholder agreement, I couldn't be held responsible for that account because I wasn't 18.
Right.
So the customer service representative I spoke with on the phone said that because 2 payments had been made on the account, that it wasn't identity theft. And she essentially called me a liar. She said, well, identity thieves don't do that. They don't make any payments on credit card accounts. Well, now we know that they do, to make them appear legitimate when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, this is 2001, and that wasn't widely known. And, the first place I went to for assistance, thinking this is a no-brainer. I was 13, take it off my credit report. The customer service representative essentially said I was a liar.
Wow. Wow. And Letty, I think this goes into directly what you were saying a second ago of this happens more often than not of people get these credit reports, and especially college students will go to college and realize, or young military, you're starting out your life, you're thinking, hey, I've never borrowed anything, I shouldn't have anything, and often don't know a lot about it. And Axton, this is not that uncommon. I mean, it happens more and more where even children younger than the age of 19 or 18 can have it. And Axton, in your case, it was very early on that your mother started stealing your identity and using it to open accounts. Tell us a little bit, Axton, about how she did it, because from the outside, I think everyone can think, oh, this is a happy little family, a husband and a wife and a lovely daughter, and they live in this little farming community, and there's nothing that ever goes wrong. It kind of seems a little bit like Mayville, right? And yet behind the scenes, when you
Right.
found out, everything unraveled. So give the audience, kind of give them some of that background of what you found out, all the PO boxes and everything.
Yeah, so after mom passed away, and dad found that birth certificate and credit card statement. So my dad, when he goes on a cleaning spree, we call them pitching parties. Like he gets in the mode where he's going through stuff and he's pitching. And I said, stop, because he was in that mode. He was going through things of mom's. And I said, do not throw anything away until I get there. And where mom had these things was in an outbuilding on their property that at one time she'd kind of used for a home office. And there's a workbench in this building. And by the time spring break rolled around, 2 weeks after dad had called me about that credit card statement, there was a huge just mound of papers on this workbench. And he said, I can't make sense of this, but you can. And I just started sifting through and trying to put the pieces together. Now there are holes in the documentation. For instance, I've never actually seen one of the credit cards, but I've seen credit card statements. So mom had multiple post office boxes, and she had a UPS store box in Muncie, Indiana. And dad and I went over there, and you know those snakes in a can, where you like pop the lid and then like the snake comes flying out. Well, her mailbox, because she hadn't checked the mail in probably 2 or 3 months before she had passed away, because she lost the ability to drive from all of her cancer treatments that she had been going through. And so no one knew to check this mailbox. Dad didn't know to check it. I didn't know it was there. And so we had mom's key ring. We're trying to figure out, okay, which key goes in here, and when we opened it, it was like one of the snakes in a can where all the mail just pops out because it was so stuffed. And dad asked if there was any other mail. Yeah, he asked the clerk if there was any mail, and then the guy goes, oh yeah, and then brings out a whole carton of mail. In all of this mail, there were 13 certified letters from the IRS saying that mom and dad did not pay their taxes and they were ready to seize the farm. So dad was on the verge of losing the house. Luckily, we were able to secure a tax attorney, and he was able to negotiate that tax debt down. Now, he almost lost the case because, with the IRS, mom and dad were listed as married, filing jointly. And so in the eyes of the IRS, dad was just as responsible as mom. And I found in the documentation out in that outbuilding that mom had been put on, well, mom and dad, according to the IRS, even though dad knew nothing about it, mom and dad had, in the eyes of the IRS, defaulted on a payment plan. So when the tax attorney went to work with them, they didn't want to work with them. They didn't want to give because mom had already defaulted on this payment plan. And in the eyes of the IRS, it's like, well, no, both of you defaulted on his payment plan, even though dad knew nothing about it.
Right.
And I'm not going to get the wording exactly right. The attorney said there was a way to claim some sort of innocent spouse, something. I forget the exact language he used, but he said that's a really hard thing to prove. And we had told him that mom had forged dad's signature on legal documents. And at first, you could tell the signatures changed over time, because at first you could tell she tried to really match dad's signature because their handwriting was wildly different. And then after a while, she didn't even try to disguise it. And so I told the attorney this, and I have a basket of it. Well, it's a wicker file box with all of this documentation, and it's all in file folders. And the tax attorney said, "Do you have proof that your mom was forging your dad's signature?" And I said, "Well, how much proof do you need?"
Right.
And he said, "Send me anything you have that shows that she was clearly forging his signature." And I did. And that's what got the IRS to negotiate. So had dad pitched all of that stuff, you wouldn't have a house. I mean, that's really probably where it would have ended up.
Wow.
But yeah, the tax attorney we hired just about didn't help us save the house. So, but we were able to do that, and dad's still living in that house today.
Yeah. So with like identity theft, documentation is key. I often tell my clients to just date everything, track everything. Like, you're an attorney. Who they marry is one of the most important financial decisions they're ever going to make. Choose wisely. But you don't know, I mean, it's wild. And I've actually had experiences contacting the credit reporting agencies, like working with a client. They'll call them up and they're like, no, they won't help, like they won't do this what we needed them to do. They're charging us. And like, my clients have certain protections, service member protections, and so what they were doing was completely illegal. And so he asked permission if I could talk for him, and there's this whole like negotiation. And I went on there, I'm like, what you're doing is illegal, like, let me talk to your supervisor, right? And all of a sudden, the guy's voice changed. At first, he was struggling with his English. Afterwards, he spoke perfect English, got his supervisor right there. Blew our minds. We were like, how are we outsourcing the credit reporting agency, like allowing other countries to run our financial reputation?
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah. In fact, Letty, I agree that it's just mind-blowing to know, and Axton, you probably know the numbers better than even I, but identity theft is the #1 white-collar crime and continues to grow to this day. Whether it be a case of family identity theft, which it was in yours, or a complete stranger, or somehow your computer system is hacked or credit card is hacked, whatever the case may be. Axton, can you give us a few details on terms of what identity theft is like in today's age? Because you've dealt with it for the last 20 plus years.
Right. So my personal experience is not the norm in 2020. I mean, certainly there are a lot of familial identity theft cases out there, whether it's an adult child stealing their older adult parents' identity, or parents stealing their children's identity. That still goes on. And unfortunately, we don't yet as a society talk about those issues enough, particularly with familial identity theft. But since the pandemic, the way that identity theft is committed has shifted. There's a greater focus on government benefits fraud now. So essentially stealing unemployment benefits, that has been, for lack of a better way to say it, a hot trend with identity theft this year. Whether it's unemployment benefits, that's a big one. Just government benefits in general, stimulus checks, um, SSI, WIC benefits, those government benefits. That's what identity thieves are going for.
Wow.
And, phishing scams are increasing because, these scammers are capitalizing on the fact that people are in desperate financial straits and they're looking for money. They're looking for miracles. A lot of people in stressful situations that are looking for a way out. And, like these different, COVID relief grants, I've seen a scam about that. And, people who are desperate will, they're in a tight situation. They'll click on that and think, oh, I can get some relief if I fill this information, and then it's used by a scammer. So if you're listening and you want to know more information about identity theft, my best advice is, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to, give you a COVID relief grant based on the information you fill out online that asks you for very personal information, it's a good chance it's too good to be true and it's a scam.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things too, I think, Axton, that I read throughout your book is it wasn't just the financial side, right? There were so many more. Your story is so layered. I think of initially, when people think of identity theft, they think of someone stole your money, you replace the money, life goes on, the credit card company fixes it, and whatever, life works out. In your story, life did not work out. Like, it's probably still a continuing saga to this day. And one of our viewers is asking, can you tell us about your road to emotional recovery? I think that's such a theme throughout your book of not just the financial side, but the emotional side that it played throughout your time.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think my academic training has helped keep me from really breaking down. I also think that because when finding out that mom was the offender, in my case, it made me question a lot of what I felt was reality. Like, oh, you have to be afraid of this person because they could have stolen our identity, or don't trust them. Don't talk to this relative, don't have anything to do with this former friend of the family. And so I thought, I've got to construct my own reality. I've got to find out what really happened here. So I started contacting those people. So extended family that I hadn't seen, in 20 or 30 years, some extended family that I'd never met, that, were out of our lives for various reasons prior to my being born. Went to former friends of mom's to ask questions. I even went to her 40th class reunion to ask questions. So it was an alumni banquet where there were several classes there. So I said at the class of 74 table, I clearly do not look old enough to be in the class of 74. So stuck out like a sore thumb. But did ask quite a few questions there. Again, trying to figure out, okay, what is real and what is not real? And being able to find what is real for myself and not filtered through the lens of mom, I think has been really helpful.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a traumatic thing. 11, 13, 19, she had cancer, she passed away, and then all this happened. Like, that emotional component, it's trauma. And I do work with a lot of people that have like PTSD, and they kind of sometimes live in it. And what I've learned, like, from like the biofeedback in the brain, is that when, like, a way to heal is, instead of like having those vivid memories in color, is to kind of be able to visit them and they're in black and white now. Like, it's not so sparking. And so my question is, were you able to talk with professionals during this? Was the writing the book cathartic for you?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, because we meaning mom and dad and I, lived under a shroud of secrecy. And also mom had told a lot of lies about dad in particular, and a few about me. About me, she told at least one of her friends that I had married my ancient history professor, and I had to tell her friend, well, that's impossible because I never took ancient history. She asked me if my husband was my ancient history professor. What? So part of it was also for me setting the record straight. Something she said several times, that I learned in my process of talking with different people, was that she said that my dad beat her, that my dad threw a heavy ladle at her one night. We didn't own a heavy ladle because, no one in our family cooked in a way that would have required that. She said that they were divorced and then they reconciled and then they separated, then they got divorced. I don't know how many times they've been separated and divorced in mom's stories. They were never separated or divorced, ever. They were married for almost 39 years. So I put that in the book. Part of this is setting the record straight, because I don't know how many people out there believe that my dad was beating my mom, and it's not true. I don't know how many people out there believe that mom and dad were divorced. It's not true.
Or that you married your ancient history professor.
Yeah. So that telling people, right. Like, yeah, setting the record straight was also something that was cathartic.
Yeah. And so the diagnosis, because this at the end, it becomes a mental health personality disorder, PTSD and trauma from her own childhood, because her mother had very toxic coping patterns. And so what was the diagnosis? Did you ever discover what the real diagnosis was?
No. So at the end of the book, trying to explain why mom was the way she was, we didn't come up with some potential ideas. One that I leaned on pretty heavily is antisocial personality disorder. And the reason for that is that a core feature of that is you lack guilt. So you lack, when you're ready to do something that's wrong, it's wrong. You have the intelligence to know the difference between right and wrong, but that little guilt trigger that most of us have, those with antisocial personality disorder don't have that. And mom had ample opportunity before she passed away to tell me or tell dad what was facing us, in terms of the taxes and the identity theft. She never did. And in 2012, I won the New Achiever Award from AAFCS for my child identity theft research and outreach. And the conference was in Indianapolis, so mom and dad came to the awards dinner. They drove down for that. There are photos, and there's one that's used in a lot of different media stories that I've done, with me holding my little plaque and standing in the center, and dad's on one side, mom's on the other. She knew she was responsible for that, but there's no glimmer of guilt on her face whatsoever.
And Axton, even at the end of the book, your mother passed away of cancer, and she struggled health-wise for several months. This wasn't an overnight heart attack. So she even was on literally her deathbed, and yet never, ever gave anything away. I think the only thing you said in the book that even gave you a hint that something was off is you'll need to take care of your father, right?
Yep. She repeated that like a broken record. And so my now husband and I were in the room. Dad had gone back home to feed the animals, and she starts telling what we were doing. she had been put on hospice, and the hospice workers gave us a book of all, of all the questions you need to ask before your loved one passes away. And so I was going through that booklet, and as part of that, she said, you have to take care of your dad. Just take care of your dad. Just take care of your dad, just over and over. At the time, I was thinking, okay, this is the morphine and the Dilaudid talking, because she was on high doses of both. And I looked at my now husband, Rob, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders like, I don't know what's going on here. And I looked at Mom and I said, Dad's a big boy.
Right.
What am I supposed to take care of? And I said, did you not pay a bill or something? And she rolled her eyes into the back of her head, flipped her head back, gritted her teeth, and said, just take care of your dad. And that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, she just couldn't come to terms.
If you could even call that a hint, that was a hint.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like you specialized in this field. Is there a way, like investigatively, that they could have tracked what kind of progress have we made with technology to be able to track down that person that stole your identity? Because I just see it so often that families steal from identities from families. The poor tend to steal from the poor. The elderly tend to steal from the elderly. It's people that are close to them. And so,
right.
What kind of progress have we made with the tracking and identification? Because I know that some states they struggle because they get so many calls at the police department for identity theft. And so, what is the solution?
Right. So, oftentimes, and this is not to be negative to any law enforcement agency, but you're right. Law enforcement agencies get inundated with identity theft complaints. And identity theft crosses jurisdictional boundaries. And so that can make a particular law enforcement agency, that can make it difficult for them to pursue a particular identity theft case. And they also just don't have the resources. They only have so many officers and so many detectives and whatnot. So honestly, my personal opinion is that if you are a victim of identity theft and you want to know who is responsible, you have to dig on your own. And that's looking at your credit report and requesting transaction information, about any credit card statements or loans that have been taken out in your name. If existing account takeover happens, where say someone obtains money from your checking account or your existing credit card, you have that transaction data. So you can see where those purchases were made. And in fact, in many jurisdictions, law enforcement will go to those stores and get the camera footage, from the retailers if it was an in-person transaction. For online deliveries, especially in the pandemic, we're doing so much online shopping now.
Yep.
Those delivery addresses can be obtained. So, for instance, my husband's credit card was breached a couple of years ago, and somebody used his credit card to buy something at Best Buy and have it shipped somewhere in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Very clearly that wasn't him, but that was a piece of information that was useful in identifying, I won't say identifying, but narrowing the pool of who may be responsible. Most identity thieves are not as smart as my mom. They're really not.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a master manipulator. And I think that her manipulation and her seamless telling of lies to so many people and keeping up all of those lies and all of those different versions of herself, depending on who she was around, including, using different names with different people, that's pathological. Mm-hmm. That's consistent with antisocial personality disorder. So I don't want people thinking that if their identity is ever stolen, it's by, someone who's a total criminal mastermind who has a personality disorder. Most identity thieves are just not that smart.
I will say, I believe they're kind of getting smarter. You've heard of those ones that go down the East Coast, the 95, right before spring break, and they will drop scanners in all of the ATM slots that they possibly can. They'll wait a couple of weeks, and then they'll come back and they will just collect all the data. Florida, there was a report in the state of Florida, 22,000. And I mean, it is out there. It is rampant, especially in like tourism areas, especially in DC. I don't use my ATM card for anything, and I tell my client cards give them an extra level of protection.
Right, and that's really good advice. To don't use your ATM card that is tied to your checking account anywhere other than an ATM. Don't use it at the gas pump. Don't use it at Walmart, because again, those skimmers can be attached to gas pumps and different point of sale terminals. Now, if you're one way to check for these skimmers, as the average person who's not a tech guru, who's not with law enforcement, one way you can check, and I've done this successfully one time, is grab the card reader and wiggle it. See how loose it is.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, these skimmers will fit. A lot of them now will fit over the actual card reader. Just wiggle it. See if it's loose. I mean, that's not 100% foolproof way, but it is one way.
Yeah. And I think, Axton, too, one of the things that I thought throughout your book is you lived in fear for most of your upbringing, even into college, you just lived in constant fear. And so I definitely want to protrude that across to the audience that's listening today, is you don't need to live in fear from identity theft. Often in this day and age, with everything electronic, it's not a matter of if you're going to be a victim of identity theft. It's probably going to be a matter of when. The government has been breached, our credit reporting agencies have been breached.
Right.
But the key parts, I think, of takeaways that I've learned from yours is be vigilant, right? Be vigilant with your information. Be aware of what you're putting it on. For example, don't put your social security on any doctor's forms. No doctor needs to know your social security number, right? As few places as you can use your name, your date of birth. Obviously, your name is going to be out, but your social security number and date of birth, those three key pieces of information need to be kept really private as much as possible. The other thing that I could think of too, with yours, is this wasn't just a case of identity theft. It actually is a really good example of financial infidelity and how mental health can directly affect not just the emotional relationship of a family, but the financial relationship of a family. I think you even mentioned in your book that possibly your mother has multiple personality disorder as well. So it would have been helpful had she had some mental health resources, as well as some of the other things that she needed to be whole. What are your thoughts on that?
That's
right. Oh, go ahead.
So that's where coping, like having tools in your, I'm like, where are my tools? Am I using them? Just taking care of ourselves. Like as a mom, like I really, especially because this is quite the year that we have been through, but I have built into my kids, what are your tools? Like if they're upset, they have a journal. Like they're healthy tools to use. And sometimes we're just not taught that in childhood. Nobody's taught to communicate about money in a healthy manner. It becomes such a hot topic. And so I think just acquiring tools and using them, like what tools do I have? And I think every parent struggle, like tools that they need in life, because life is not getting easier. It's just getting more and more complex. And you had even mentioned that in the book, like 11-year-old you had no idea what was coming, and it just got so much harder. Yeah. So.
Well, Axton, in closing, we have loved having you here tonight. We've appreciated you coming on and really sharing your story. I was really impressed throughout your book of how personal you got with this. I mean, this is really putting you out for everyone to read about and to know about. But in the same time, I really think that your story, the way in which it was written, has such an impact on people of relatability. I mean, there were several times throughout there that I could put family members in a place of thinking, oh, this probably isn't correct, or there's something out of, looking a little bit deeper than I had thought before in different situations. Then there was also the other side of me that was saying, have I done this to protect myself? What am I doing to stay vigilant on my own work? As well as just having a lot of empathy towards you and almost a robbed childhood in some ways. So I just think that there was such a great way to write your story. It was really where true crime meets finances, and it brings it across in such a personal and professional way. And we feel honored that you would come and spend your Friday evening with us. So thank you so much. Are there any last thoughts or final words from either of you?
You're welcome.
I do have a question. How is your husband and dad? Because I did underline a section where you said your husband had the right answers, like he had the book of the right response to your situation, and that
Yeah. My husband was probably raised with better coping skills than what I was, and what multiple generations in my family have been raised with. So he always knew the right things to say. I will say that this in a way was hard on him, because of my two parents, he thought mom was the normal one, because she could talk sports. She played golf with grandpa. She worked at a radio station when Rob and I were dating. And so she could talk all the different rock bands that that would come by the station, and all the famous people she was meeting. He was really into that. Whereas my dad was more the type of, if you want to talk to me, I'm going to be out in the barn. And so, because mom could talk about those everyday small talky pop culture things, he felt more comfortable with mom and thought that she was more normal than dad. And so he's really had to rethink his perceptions. And now he understands why dad made a beeline for the barn and stayed out there, because of, how things were between him and mom. We'll say about my dad, in the book, I talk about the motorcycle. That has been a very good coping mechanism for him. I mean, for example, he still receives mail in mom's name, and most of it's junk mail.
My goodness.
Or,
your dad was the hero in the book, just so you know, the absolute hero. He's my hero. Like, his character is solid, and I will choose character over personality any day, and it matters the actions, not the words. I loved it. Thank you so much for writing the book and being so truthful.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for him at times to be forthcoming, because he got asked a lot of really difficult questions as well. And he's had to go back and rethink some of the perceptions that he had based on what he's learned about mom and based on what other family members have told him. I do think it's been really healing to go through that process. We've reconnected with members of our extended family, so that's been a good thing. He wasn't allowed to talk to his sister for 20 years because for a while she was a suspect of the identity theft. Now that we know that's not true, they see each other regularly. She brings her grandkids out to the farm. They love my dad. So it's good. And, in that regard, it's been a really positive thing. The bike has helped him relieve stress. When he gets mail in mom's name and, he starts feeling, that pressure, that tension, he can get on the bike and just take off for a while, then come home, go out and feed the animals and go in for the night, and he's fine.
So he's learned his own coping mechanisms as well. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Axton, we just thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are glad for all of you that are out there. We're thankful that you would join us tonight and spend your evening with us. We look forward to seeing you next month. We've got another great book, another true story, actually. It's called The Choice by Dr. Edith Edgar, and it's a true story about, she's a Holocaust survivor and has had harrowing experiences through 3 different concentration camps and is an incredible researcher today. She too, Axton, I think, has found some tranquility in her research and her studies to be able to help others. So we look forward to reading that with you next month. Join us again, and we'll see you in 6 weeks for our next book. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and a special thanks to Axton for being here. Good night.
You're welcome.